myth of motivation. And this is another mental model that I think I first stumbled across this about 5 or 6 years ago. The day I discovered this mental model, it genuinely changed the game for me in terms of how I think about productivity. And just learning about this made me, I think, significantly more productive than I would have been otherwise. And that's the idea that motivation is a myth. So what is motivation? Let's take a step back and do another diagram again. So let's say we want to, for me, it's, the thing that I struggle with is going to the gym. But for a lot of students who tend to be most of my audience, it tends to be sitting down to study for the exam. So you would start with the thought, right? So the thought would be something like, I should study. That would be the thought that, crosses it into our mind. And at some point, we would get potentially the action, which is, actually studying and sitting down and opening the books or using Anki or using the retrospective revision timetable. We start off with the thought of I should study, and then at some point we might get to the action of actually studying. And partly the whole point of the productivity thing and watching a class like this is you want to get from the thought to the action, ideally without too much problem in between. But actually the thing that loads of us struggle with, and I did a poll on my Instagram story where I asked, what are your productivity woes? And 2,000 people replied to this poll. And at least half the answers was something to do with, I really struggle to get started. I really struggle to find the motivation to do the thing that I know I should do. We know we should study, but the actual studying, we tend not to do. So why is that? Well, there's a few different reasons for it, but the word motivation comes into here now. And the word motivation comes in between the thought and the action. So motivation would be sort of the middleman. And what is motivation? Motivation is the feeling of wanting to do something. I feel like studying. So we've got I should study, then the motivation bit is I feel like studying, and then the studying bit, then the action bit is actually doing the studying. And actually, more accurately, it's probably I feel like studying right now. We all study when we feel like it. We all watch Netflix when we feel like it. We all play sports or hang out with our friends or watch videos on YouTube when we feel like it. But that's where the motivation comes in. We think we have to feel like doing the thing before we do the thing. And so thought goes to motivation, which goes to action, is kind of the traditional procrastinator's, non-productive person's view of the motivation equation. But the whole point of this class is to make us more productive. Going back to our actual productivity equation, productivity equals useful output over time multiplied by the fun factor. But in order to actually get the output bit, we actually have to get started. And that is where the motivation equation comes in, and that's where we have a problem. Going back to our pilot, plane, and engineer analogy, it's all very well, being the pilot and setting my course that today I'm gonna get 5 of my subjects of chemistry done, or today I'm gonna prepare for that physiology supervision that I'm giving later this day. It's all very well setting that course as the pilot, but then as the actual plane, we all struggle to take off. We struggle to actually get the plane off the ground, actually sit down and do the work. Because we think about motivation in this way, and this is the wrong way to think about motivation. This is a myth. So motivation is a myth. Instead, in an ideal world, what would actually happen is that we would have the thought, right? I should study. And that would directly lead to the action regardless of how we are feeling. Motivation is fundamentally a feeling. And relying on our feelings as a way of setting our course in life and getting what we need to do done is a recipe for disaster, because feelings are temporary, feelings are fleeting, feelings don't last for very long, they're transient. Take all the synonyms for fleeting that you want. Feelings are temporary, they're unreliable. Our feelings change moment to moment depending on the time of day, depending on the time of month, depending on the time of year, depending on what's going on in our lives. Feelings are not a reliable way to get anything done. Instead, we should just have the thought and we should go to action. And some people might describe that thing as discipline. When you have discipline, you go directly from thought to action regardless of how you're feeling. And if we want to be more productive, this is the secret, if there is a secret, of getting started with anything. It's recognizing that motivation is a myth. We don't need motivation. All we need is the thought and the action. And through discipline, through willpower, whatever you want to call it, from the thought, we lead to the action. Now, there's a great post on a random website called Wiz Domination. I haven't read much of the stuff on this website. I've tried, but it's not really my thing. But they've got a fantastic post called Screw Motivation, What You Need is Discipline. And this was the post that I read years and years ago. And when I first came across this, it genuinely blew my mind because it was the first time I'd seen the motivation equation sort of in this sort of context, that motivation is the thing in between thought and action. And actually we should just use discipline to go all the way. And they say on the website, which is, I'll sort of paraphrase the quote. They say that motivation relies on the erroneous assumption that we need to feel like doing the thing that we're doing before we actually do it. They also say on the website, a 3-year-old does what it feels like doing. An adult does what an adult knows it should, or an adult does his duty or her duty. A 3-year-old does what they feel like. An adult does what they need to do. And when we're thinking about productivity and when we're thinking about getting stuff done, we want to act like the adults here. We don't want to be a slave to our 3-year-old self. I think Tim Urban, the guy behind the Wake But Why blog, has a good mental model for this. He's got a very good talk about the procrastinator's dilemma and like inside the mind of a master procrastinator. And he talks about how in our minds, we've got this 3-year-old kind of little baby that's like, wailing for attention and relying on its feelings. And I need to feel like doing this thing, otherwise I'm not going to do it. And like the main reason why we love watching stuff about improving our productivity, the objective is to quash that 3-year-old so that it's irrelevant, and actually we do what the adult inside us wants us to do, which is the thought of I should study, or for me, I should go to the gym. I personally don't really have any problems with studying because I quite enjoy it. And that ties into our whole fun thing, the fun factor. The fun factor bleeds into all aspects of the productivity equation, because if we can enjoy what we're doing, we don't need motivation for it anymore. Like, when was the last time you said, I need motivation to watch Netflix? You really don't. We need to do motivation. And in fact, like, usually we only need motivation to do the things that are short-term painful and long-term useful. Yeah. So for me, it's things like going to the gym, short-term pain, long-term useful. Stretching, short-term pain, long-term useful. Eating healthily, learning how to cook. These sorts of things where it's potentially unpleasant in the moment, but I know it's going to lead to greater rewards further down the line. And there's a few different problems with this. And understanding where these problems are allows us to target the interventions to kind of hack our motivation. So we've kind of talked about the theory of it. Let's now go into some practical tips. Essentially, there's two aspects of the equation that we can target. There is the action itself, and then there's the outcome. And usually the problem with things that require motivation is usually that the outcome is a long time in the future. We don't have a very good feedback loop. If, for example, I went to the gym one day and immediately I saw an increase in the size of my biceps, I would be going to the gym every day, right? We all would, because the feedback loop is immediate. We get that reward, we get that dopamine hit. We start off with these little successes and that makes us become more motivated. So if we see the success of I did a bicep curl and my bicep increased in size, I'm like, yes, I automatically look better. Then of course I'd be doing bicep curls all day, every day, because I can see the successes. But usually we need motivation for the things where the feedback loop is significantly longer. For example, like healthy eating. It's so hard to lose weight because we don't see, we deprive ourselves of that, McDonald's drive-through. This is something that I struggle with a lot, back when McDonald's was open, prior to the lockdown, depending on when you're watching this. We would deprive ourselves of the chips and immediately we would lose weight. If the feedback loop were that tight, no one would have a problem with keeping weight down. But we do, because the feedback loop is too long.